And welcome back to another episode of The Deconversionists with your host, Alan Bondar, aka The Unraveler, co-host Elliot Christofferson. What's up, man? It's good to have you back this week.
Good to be here.
It's going to be a fun one. You know, I'm a little skeptical that you're actually here. Oh, speaking of that, let's talk skepticism. I'm really good at these transitions. I work really hard at them. Skepticism, according to the dictionary, and I have the, which dictionary is this? A Merriam-Webster dictionary here. The definition is an attitude of doubt or a disposition to incredulity, either in general or toward a particular object. So essentially, when there's nothing of credentials, nothing of credibility to sustain what is being argued for, there's no evidence for it. A second kind of similar definition here is the doctrine that true knowledge or knowledge in a particular area is uncertain. So that's what we're talking about with skepticism. So we're going to kind of talk about some of the implications of being a skeptic. Elliot and I would both be skeptics. I would think you are as well, right? So we're both skeptics, but we think that skepticism actually has ramifications and implications for other positions as well. And so we're going to talk about those today. But before we do, Elliot's going to take over and give you some more information about skepticism.
So the most important thing I think about skepticism, and this speaks to a common misconception that the general public has. Skepticism and pessimism, or cynicism, not pessimism. Skepticism and cynicism are not the same thing. And oftentimes people will be accused of being too skeptical. And what they really mean is you're a cynic. You don't believe anything. Well, a skeptic is not someone who refuses to believe something. A skeptic is simply someone who demands evidence before believing it. So skepticism is a process to get to the truth, or get to the truth through the correct way of getting there, which includes examining the evidence in the proper way, using the principles of skepticism. And if they can establish that, then they believe the statement or accept the claim. So it's not a rejection of a claim. It's simply demanding the correct process to get there. So for example, some of the main principles of skepticism are suspending judgment until correct evidence is gathered, seeking proof before accepting a claim, and recognizing that current knowledge is provisional and can be overturned by new evidence, meaning that even after you accept a claim, you don't take it with 100% certainty, because you realize that more information can be gained in the future that might in fact disprove the claim that you have tentatively accepted. So those are essentially the principles that we work through as skeptics, because we want to have the best information, the best evidence, and the best reasons for accepting a claim. And of course, the flip side to that would be, well, hey, it sounds good to me, so I'll just believe it. Well, that's not what we do, which is why both me and Ellen are no longer Christians, because we originally accepted the claim without good evidence and without good reason and without a process. Like, I don't know about Ellen, but I was essentially born into Christianity. I did not have a choice. I took it as absolute 100% truth with no room for doubt. Well, everybody has doubts, but no room for doubt that leads to disbelieving it. And so, like most Christians, we just grow into adulthood, and we never apply the principles of skepticism to our most sacred personal beliefs. Now, when we go ahead and do that as adults, we find very quickly that our belief system falls apart very fast, because applying the principles of skepticism to a supernatural belief like Christianity, you find a massive conflict.
So there is a process in which a skeptic goes through a lot of times to unwire themselves from a belief system that they may have been born in. So I would say that even as a Christian, I was always very skeptical, which in my opinion is much of the reason why I journeyed such a far distance from the theology I was raised with through all the way to end up as an atheist. But I had to go through a lot of steps to get there, because when you're in a matrix, you can still be skeptical, but you're only skeptical within that matrix. So you don't realize the world outside of it. And so you're stuck in there. And so I was able to get myself all the way down the ranks to full preterism ultimately, because I was not willing to just sit in this system that didn't make sense. I wasn't willing to accept things that weren't adding up. And then when I got to full preterism, eventually I had to keep going and going and going until I had nothing left to hold on to in Christianity. And then what skepticism does is it forces you to evaluate all the data and make a decision whether you're going to hold on to it still or let it go, which is where the third point came in that you made. You got to hold on to anything you do loosely. Interestingly, even when I was a Christian, I remember I used to tell my congregation, I used to teach them this thing called fluid dogma. I have a whole chapter of it in my book, about it in my book. So I think everybody's going to be dogmatic with information they have at any given time. I mean, it's just the way we are. We think we have an answer and we hold to it. But you got to be fluid, which is much of what you were explaining. It's just a term that I coined, but it's exactly the same thing you're saying, is that you had to hold it loosely, even though you're dogmatic because you believe what you have right now is currently the best explanation of what you have. But you got to hold it fluidly and say, hey, there's more I might learn. There's more information that might come in that may change my perspective. So even as a Christian, I was dogmatic, but I was fluid. And so I was always changing. That was one of the jokes I used to hear from people all the time. What view does Alan hold this week? Because it was constantly in flux. Because that's what happens. If you're willing to study and you're willing to learn, you're always going to be changing and modifying and growing in your knowledge. So eventually you can break the mold and escape. You can escape the matrix that religion holds you in. It's not easy though. That's for sure. It's not easy to get there. It's easy once you're there to walk away, because once you see it, there's no unseeing it. You're like, I'm just done with this, and you just move on. That part's easy. Getting there is not so easy. It takes a little bit of effort to remove the brainwashing. But that being said, then you may have those who are watching, you may already see the implication that Ellie and I are communicating, that if you are skeptical, you can't actually be a theist. I mean, at least after your process is complete, because you can't continue to hold on to a justification for a God when you don't believe there's one that exists, or you don't have evidence to substantiate the existence of a God. So you have to withhold judgment. That was the first one. How was the first one phrased? Withholding judgment until there's evidence, or something like that?
Right. And I can give a few more here that actually go more in depth. Proportion evidence to the claim. So if you have an extreme claim, you want to have some kind of extreme evidence. If you have a mundane claim, then maybe mundane evidence is good enough.
Right. Like if I say I have 10 cents in my pocket, it's very inconsequential to your life.
Right.
You probably won't even ask me to prove it. You'll just accept it.
Yeah. But if you've got the winning lottery ticket,
right,
we're going to need to see some proof, and maybe more than just a lottery ticket. We'd also need to verify it using some other resource. Make sure it's not fraudulent, or you made it up, or it's old. Right. Another one is preferring testability and falsifiability. So if you make a statement or a claim, there has to be a way to test it. And furthermore, there has to be a process by which you could potentially falsify it. Like perhaps the claim is not false, but there has to be a way to test to see if it's false. Like if you tell me there's an object inside of a box, now that's a falsifiable claim, because I can look in the box and I can see if there in fact is nothing in the box. There, I falsified the claim. There has to be a way to do that. But perhaps I look in the box and there is something in it. Like there, you've proven the claim. But there has to be a way to determine if it is false. Another one is use independent reproducible verification. Apply methodological naturalism. Now that's one that might be a little radioactive for Christians, because there's a lot of things in Christianity that are not subject to methodological naturalism. And what we mean by that is the laws of nature. Science essentially gives us a way to test things in the real world. Well, the supernatural is something that falls outside of the natural world and is not
testable.
It's not available to science. Like we can't do a science experiment or anything observable to determine whether something in fact was actually supernatural. So that falls outside of that, the realm of naturalistic methods. Let's see. Another one is recognize cognitive biases. We all have a boatload of cognitive biases that cloud our thinking. These are essentially like computer viruses running on our brain's computer. Um, it's virtually impossible to de-bias completely and remove all of them, but it is something that has to be taken into consideration when we're attempting to use the principles of skepticism. Like this is why we have like like scientific methods are essentially the process of removing the biases, like double-blind, placebo-controlled studies with proper control groups that removes the biases from both the researchers and the test subjects. Um, Evaluate sources and expertise. Also, something that's very important is the consensus. So I want to talk about this real fast. If there is a consensus within a field of which is the majority of the experts in that field all saying the same thing, yes, we all agree. The majority of us agree on this particular point. You as the common man who does not have expertise in that field, the only rational conclusion for you is to accept that consensus because you have no way of fact checking the experts. This gets a little weird when the experts are wrong, but even when they are shown to be wrong, in the end, you as the common man don't have a justification to call them wrong because you do not have a special knowledge in that field. Therefore, this will be controversial. Therefore, back in say I think it was the 1500s where Galileo was fighting with the Catholic Church about the heliocentric model of the solar system, he had made a discovery that demonstrated that the sun or that the earth rotated the sun, whereas the church at the time, the consensus of the experts of the time was that the earth was the center of the solar system. Now, Galileo was proved to be right, but at the time, he was one man against the consensus, and the consensus was wrong. But if you were some middle-aged peasant in Europe at that time, you had no idea what either side was talking about. You weren't a scientist, you weren't an astronomer, you weren't doing the calculations yourself. So the only rational thing for you to do would have been to accept the consensus, even though wrong. You had no way to know Galileo was right, and that's something that had to get ironed out into the future. It was on the frontier of science, but you would have been rational. Maybe you wouldn't have been correct, but you would have been a rational skeptic to accept the incorrect consensus because it's the only thing you could have done without specialized knowledge.
But that being said, you don't necessarily have to fall on the position either. You don't have to fall on your sword, so to speak,
Correct.
and say, "Oh, I'm definitively agreeing with the consensus." You can simply say, "I don't know," as well. You can say, "This is what consensus says. I don't know whether I agree or not. I can't make any valid arguments against it. I don't have the equipment to do that." Or if you can, then you should be able to, and you can prove it and go ahead and demonstrate it. But if you can't, and you're just not certain, just say, "I don't know." That is a legitimate
judgment.
Withhold judgment. Yeah, it's a legitimate response. So you don't have to go with the consensus, but to argue that they're wrong without being able to validate your position is just nonsensical.
Now, where it gets interesting is when there is a conclusion that has an actual implication on your life. Say, for example, religion comes into the picture and says, if you do not accept X, then Y will happen to you. Like if you don't accept Jesus as your savior, you will go to hell. So then you're in a position where perhaps you have to make a determination. And that's where it gets tricky because now you have to apply some kind of methodology to that claim in order to make an informed decision that may or may not have real world implications to you.
Sure. And I mean, and it's okay to ask the question, well, why is the first point true even? What you say, if I don't accept Jesus, then I'll go to hell. Well, what have you proven Jesus is real? Have you proven he's telling the truth? Have you proven that this is true? I mean, sure, there's a consensus out there that claims that Jesus is real and saves the world and from their sins, and you'll go to hell if you don't. So The
Right, but
question is,
then that's where the principles of skepticism come in for you, is to
correct.
apply this process to an extraordinary claim like religion makes,
Correct.
so that you can make an informed decision.
Right. This isn't a dime in your pocket. This is about some supernatural being making a dictation upon your life, and it's an eternal consequence. That is a big deal. Also, one of the reasons why we do what we do, because people think we should just leave everybody alone to believe what they want. Well, first of all, we're not knocking on doors making anybody listen to us. We're just doing a show. If you want to listen, great. We welcome you, and we feel we have the right to post on our walls anytime we want to. So I don't see how we're doing the same thing that Christians are doing by, getting in your face and saying Jesus loves you and you need to believe to go to heaven. But
Right.
anyway, that being said, yeah, it's a gigantic claim, not just a dime in your pocket. I mean, I would need a lot of evidence at this point to believe that this story is even remotely true anymore. So anyway, on to your next point, if there was any.
Well, I wanted to kind of talk about the source material that Christianity is based in, and how these principles of skepticism could potentially be applied to it. So, at the core of Christianity is obviously the Bible, but even more specific would be the four Gospels.
Sure. Before we go there, can I just make a statement, because I want to
Yeah.
tie in some of those points with withholding judgment until there's evidence. So not only can you not be a theist if you're a skeptic, simply because there's not actually any substantiating evidence to demonstrate the supernatural. There's no way to test it. We have no way of knowing that it's true. You as an individual might say you've had an experience and there's no question in your mind that God exists. Okay. I can't tell you whether you had that experience or not. I'm skeptical that you have had an experience with God, simply because if there is a God and there is a way to meet him, and your job as an evangelist, as a preacher of the word of God, and you're supposed to tell me how to meet God. If you can't help me do that and help me get the same experience you can, then I'm really skeptical you even had it. I mean, that's a big concern of mine. So there's a God up there, wants us all to meet him. And supposedly here we are, we're asking people to tell us how to meet Jesus, and nobody can seem to do it. That's a little shady on this God's part, in my opinion, and very, very odd that he would just come and tell you as a special person, but not me. So you can't really be a theist if you're going to be skeptical. You'd have to sit back and say, okay, theism is one option, a possibility, but I have no evidence to believe it's true. I've never seen anything supernatural. Supernatural may or may not exist, but there's no way to test it or validate it. So, all we can work with is the natural, as one of the points said. And so we have a methodology by which we can test things, and the supernatural tends to fall outside of it, not because the system was developed or the methodology was developed to exclude it, but it's the only method we have to work with. And it just happens to exclude it because it doesn't exist, at least not according to the methodology. It doesn't appear to exist. So until we have a methodology by which we can actually test the supernatural and everybody can equally see it, I have no reason to believe it. So I'm going to be skeptical and say, I have no reason to believe that Christianity or theism in general is true. And there's no supernatural as far as I can tell. So I'm going to withhold judgment on that until I have some evidence. And in the meantime, I am what you call an atheist. So by default, if you are not a theist, you are an atheist. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that get very irritated with atheists for many reasons. One is we say that if you're not a theist, you have to be an atheist. So you might be watching saying, oh, I can't believe you just said that. Well, first of all, it's true. You can't just, there's no middle ground there. You either believe a God exists or you don't believe a God exists, or I should say it another way, you don't see any reason to believe a God exists. Those really are your options. There's no middle ground there between I believe a God exists and I don't believe a God exists. So you're either a theist or you're an atheist. An atheist is not walking around making a claim, I definitely can prove no God exists. I mean, some atheists might, but that's not the generic atheist position. It's simply that we don't believe there's reason to believe God exists. That's it. It's very quite simple. So if you're adamant against atheism and you're not a theist, what are you? You've got to ask you. You cannot be a skeptic and not be an atheist. It just doesn't make sense to have any other position, because until there's a methodology by which you can validate the supernatural, you have to remain in the atheistic position, and even not believing there's a supernatural, because you have no way to prove it or demonstrate it. So I know that there may be atheists you can't stand, And maybe they really piss you off, but that doesn't make you anything different. You're still an atheist if you don't believe God exists. That's it. Like, you like them or don't like them, but atheism isn't some like group like we all get together and you either like us or you don't. We're not a brotherhood. It's
Right.
just an acceptance that we don't have any real reason to believe a God exists. So hopefully that helps you as a skeptic to finally cross that line and stop trying to avoid the term atheism, because it's just what you are. If you're a skeptic, you can't, I don't see how it's possible to be anything else. But anyway, back to where you were going, or you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, I do want to comment on that. So let's take this idea of proving God doesn't exist and how we can't do that. There's something called Russell's teapot, and it's the idea or the hypothesis that there is a teapot floating in outer space, orbiting the planet Saturn. Now, we can't see this with a telescope, but we just claim it's there. There's absolutely no way to test for that. It's a claim. It's a faith claim, and I'm probably explaining this wrong, but I'll just say this to the viewers: you can Google Russell's teapot, and you'll right away figure out what I'm talking about. But it's the idea that everywhere I look in the universe, and I don't find God, that doesn't mean that right around the next corner, right behind the next star, right 10 galaxies over, God isn't there. He could be out there somewhere, but everywhere I look, I can't find him. And until I do so, I don't have reason to believe he actually exists. And what I've told Christians before is, in the universe, we've been able to identify 4 different forces that create some sort of action on atoms. We have the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, the gravitational force, and electromagnetism. Those are the 4 we've been able to identify that actually do a thing or cause things to happen. Nowhere in the universe yet have we discovered a 5th force, a 5th creative force that brings things into existence. If you could suddenly identify a 5th creative force, you would have found God. But until you do so, like, I don't have a justification to accept that 5th force actually exists, because the Christian theology essentially implies that there is a 5th creative force that interacts, interjects itself into our closed system, into our universe, and does things. It creates things out of nothing. We can't find this 5th creative force. So until you can, I'm not justified in believing it actually exists.
Right.
Now, if you can do so, then I would reconsider my position as an atheist.
Right. So
just because I can't find that teapot orbiting Saturn does not mean it's not there.
Right.
But
it just means you withholding judgment.
I'd be unjustified to assume that it is just because someone said that it is.
Right. Exactly. So back to the definition of skepticism: an attitude of doubt or a disposition to incredulity, either in general or toward a particular object, namely God or the supernatural. This is essentially the definition of atheism. It's just what it is. So if you're a skeptic, by definition, you're an atheist. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully that helps some of you who are struggling with the word atheism, because it sounds like a dirty word, or at least growing up it was. You don't have to be scared of it. It's just a default position if you're not a theist. That's all it is.
Yeah, or if you're struggling with the definition of skepticism and you're using it as an insult or a pejorative on somebody and you say, well, they're too skeptical. Well, there isn't really such a thing as too skeptical. That is cynicism. And skepticism and cynicism are not the same, because cynicism does not give you a process to discover the truth. It simply says, yeah, I don't believe it no matter what. Well, that's not a skeptic. The skeptic will believe it eventually if you use the right process. Right. And you can actually provide the evidence, the testable, falsifiable evidence. So my point here is, if we take the Christian source material and we apply these principles to it, do they stand up to scrutiny? So you've got the Bible, which is general Christianity, and then more specifically, you have the 4 Gospels. Without the 4 Gospels, you wouldn't have the Christian religion. So what are these? The Gospels are accounts of something in the past that happened that Christians want us to accept or want us to believe. Are the Gospels the claim, or are Gospels the evidence? That's the first thing, because if you proportion, the first principle of skepticism is to proportion the evidence to the claim. So first you have to decide whether this is the claim that we're trying to prove, or whether this is actually the evidence for the claim. Now, my position is the Gospels are the claim. It's the account. It's a written account. Here's the story. We want you to believe the story. Okay, why should I believe the story? Can I test this story with some kind of a process? So that brings us to testability and falsifiability. The problem with a written account is that it took place in the past and it was written down, and now we're in the future. Historical methods use different methods than most scientific methods. They are a probability of what probably happened, but we don't know for sure, because all we have is a testimony. Can we falsify a testimony? I'm not sure. Like how would you go about testing someone's eyewitness account or claimed eyewitness account from 2,000 years ago? Like, do you have a process for that?
Nope. You can't.
I have no idea.
You really can't even validate or prove my experiences that you haven't seen. I mean, if I can't show you, you have no way of even testing something I'm saying right in front of you, much less something
Right.
2,000 years ago.
Can we use independent reproducible verification on history? We can't reproduce these events. We can't we don't have independent verification because we just have the Bible. We just have the four Gospels. Are those independent verification, or are those just simply four accounts of the same story? Like, for example,
if they're even of the same story, they're so different in some ways that sometimes they contradict each other, and you're just like, what is this even the same story being told?
Yeah, and now here is something that I wish we had, which would, in my opinion, count as an independent verification of the story, and that would be if we had a Roman document that described Jesus' crucifixion, trial and crucifixion, because the Romans, according to the four Gospels, the Romans put Jesus to death. Pilate crucified Jesus at the request of the Jews. If we had an official document from a Roman source, or a written report from Pilate or one of Pilate's entourage, that would, in my opinion, count as an independent verification of the story. But we have not yet found that, and in 2,000 years of searching for it, I mean, if Christians had access to that at some point, if that were in like the Vatican archives, something that was found in the Holy Land or found later at Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire, like that would have been made public by now. Perhaps there was one and it was lost, but we do not have it. So we don't have independent verification, during that time period. We certainly can't get independent verification now. So that presents a bit of a problem. We still just have the four accounts. We can't apply methodological naturalism to this because this happened in the past. There's no experiments we can do on this. There's no observable data. We can't run a study or a test. There's just nothing there. We have four accounts, and we kind of have a dead end where you either believe it or you don't believe it. So I can't apply the principles of skepticism to this. So why should I believe it?
Well, yeah,
because it sounds good.
Right. And so here's a very interesting barrier for Christianity that a lot of people may not have seen until this moment. At least I didn't until just now as we were talking. One would have to think that God is opposed to skepticism, that skepticism is a horrible way to live, and it is the reason so many people are going to hell. Or if you don't believe in hell, missing out on eternal life with God. Because skeptics have no reason to believe that this story is true. So if you're going to be a skeptic, you can't go to heaven. That is an irony right there, because didn't God invent reason? Aren't we following the laws of logic that supposedly God put into place? And if he put them into place and we're simply applying those rules of logic, skepticism being one of the ways that we apply those rules of logic, how is it that we're the ones getting punished for not believing a story that requires you to be skeptic less in order to
Yeah.
believe it? Right? This is a
And
problem. Like, this makes no sense.
it gets even worse than that, because like I have no way to determine whether something happened in history to a point where I can put 100% certainty label on that, because it's in the past. So, but it's worse when the historical account of the events actually brings in supernatural aspects. Like, it's not just that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and that he was crucified by the Romans. It's actually Jesus walked on water, turned
Right.
water into wine,
Right.
and,
If it was just a
rose from the
claim,
dead.
if Christianity, if all that required for Christianity was, hey, there was this guy, his name was Jesus, and he was crucified by the Romans for running his mouth, and it didn't involve believing in a God or that Jesus rose from the dead or walked on water or any of this, that would be one of those claims, kind of like the dime in your pocket. Like, okay, doesn't have any effect on my life. Sure, I can believe that. I'm sure there was more than just one Jesus who went through that too. No big deal. But you're asking us to believe far more impossible things that, by all measures, have no room in the methodological world that we live in that we can use to test these things. And so
Right.
we're supposed to abandon all reason to believe it. And then on top of it, once you're stuck in that matrix, to believe that it's reasonable.
Yeah, this is something that I call extraordinary claims versus high impact beliefs, and when those two are combined, you get yourself into a lot of trouble. So an analogy that I like to use is, let's say that my best friend comes frantically knocking at my door, and he tells me this elaborate story about how last night he was abducted by aliens, and they took him up into a spaceship and they ran tests on him, and he is freaking out, and he needs me to believe this story. That's an extraordinary claim, very extraordinary claim. Now, I can take that extraordinary claim and I can believe it with no evidence, because he would have to bring extraordinary evidence, but he doesn't have it. But let's say that I go ahead and I believe that claim. So what happens after that is where it turns into a high impact belief. Whether I'm going to let this affect my life or not is a whole another part of this. So I have two choices. I can either believe my friend and then move on with my day, or I can suddenly devote my life to trying to protect myself from the aliens that he told me about. Like, I can build a bunker, I can wear tinfoil hats. Like, I can do a lot of things because I believe this extraordinary claim, and suddenly that extraordinary claim turns into a high impact belief. And that's a lot, that's very similar to Christianity, where we have the story. Okay, I can believe the gospel narrative and not let it affect my life, as if it's just a historical event that happened. It's an extraordinary claim, but I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, maybe it happened. I'll give it an 80%. When I take it to the next level, I'm completely unjustified in doing that. Now I'm going to make it a high impact belief. I'm going to organize my entire life around it, like change everything. And now I'm going to live for Jesus, and I'm going to go, door knocking and all these things, telling other people about this story. Oh my God, you got to believe this. You got to change your entire life. This matters, because you could end up at the lake of fire, or you can end up, in heaven with God. Like, that's a really big jump between this extraordinary claim that does not have extraordinary evidence, and then turning it into a high impact belief. So in my opinion, it's totally irrational. You not only you have to have extraordinary evidence for the extraordinary claim, but you also have to have like a really good justification to turn it into a high impact belief.
Right. So Ray and I were watching, we watched the show Blue Bloods. And I know we missed it when it was on originally, but we're Netflixing it. No, we're not. We're, where is it at? Paramount. Anyway, love the show. It's really great. Anyway, last night there was an episode where there was this kid who was being abused by his father. And at the beginning of the show, he's just in the hospital. We don't know all the details yet. All we know is this kid's in the hospital, and the detective comes in, and he's talking to the doctor, and he's, what happened? The doctor says, well, he's got broken bones, and he's got bruises all over him, internal bleeding, all this. He's like, and the doctor's like, well, what do you think happened? He said, well, he's obviously being abused. There's no other explanation. And I had to pause and talk to Ray about this because this hit me hard. I was like, interesting. So that is the most plausible explanation, and most likely no other explanation, right? Doctor seems to be on point. And I don't personally know any Christian that would say, no, I actually think it's a supernatural being that's causing this and beating the kid up internally or whatever. That would not be their first conclusion. They would simply agree with the doctor. Yeah, that makes sense. And if I were to say, no, it's a supernatural being, every Christian I know will be like, stop being silly, Alan. It's not a supernatural being. It's just abuse, right? They would. But when it comes to the most absurd things in this world, God is the reason behind it, right? You just have to believe that the universe was created by God. Well, why? We have natural explanations that make far more sense just because we have a way to test them. Sure, we can't go beyond a certain point because we just don't have the tools to get there yet, or maybe never. But there's no reason to believe that there's anything beyond the natural. This could have come about by something outside of these universe's laws that started it. It doesn't have to be a God. It can be something that just like your God breaks the laws of this universe. It could be some other thing that breaks the laws of the universe. It doesn't have to be a God. No, but that has to be a God. It's just so bizarre that with normal everyday things, the natural, real explanation, the one that makes the most sense, that comports with reality, is acceptable. And a supernatural thing just doesn't really fit the scenario.
Right.
But in other scenarios, we just have to accept by faith that it's God.
Yeah. So what you're describing is using Occam's razor.
Yes.
But which I wanted to touch on. But before I get to that, I want to comment on how you started it, where the only explanation, is that he's being abused. So there's a fallacy, I believe it was coined by Matt Dillahunty, and it's called the Doyle fallacy. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the Sherlock Holmes series, and within those stories, Sherlock Holmes is often quoted as saying that once you remove all other possible explanations, the only one left that makes sense, no matter how crazy it is, has to be the right explanation. Now, that sounds great on the surface, but what that is ignoring is all of the other possible causes that you have not thought of, because you're a finite human that can't think of every single possible explanation. So to simply eliminate the first 10 you can think of, and then say, well, number 11, even though it's crazy, it's the only one left, so that has to be the explanation. No, it doesn't. You can suspend judgment, say, well, maybe I don't have an inexhaustible list of every possible explanation for this certain set of circumstances. It's just kind of a side note. But when you get to Occam's razor, which states that the simplest explanation, controlling for certain variables, is the most likely one to be true. So we can take Occam's razor and we can go back to the New Testament, the four Gospels, and we can apply Occam's razor to that and say, okay, we have competing explanations here. These stories are true. These supernatural events actually happened. Extraordinary claim, very extraordinary, because we have certain passages. For example, one of the Gospels says that when Jesus died, there was a great earthquake and the sun was blacked out for 3 hours, and people rose from their graves and marched into Jerusalem and appeared to many. Now that, in my opinion, that's probably the craziest event in all of human history, if in fact it happened.
And those of you who are wondering where that's at, it's Matthew 26, if you'd like to look it up.
Yeah, I didn't know off the top of my head.
No, that's okay.
I knew it wasn't.
I think
Yeah, I
it's
knew it
26.
wasn't Mark. Interestingly, it wasn't Mark, the first gospel, which is the shortest and the most mundane, and
It
does
might be
not.
28. It's either 26 or 28, but it's
Yeah,
okay. It's neither here nor there, but it's near the end of the thing there. But that's where
and
that's
it's definitely not in Luke. Probably one reason is Luke starts that, or the writer of Luke starts that gospel by saying, "I've examined these accounts that were handed down." Um, so when you only have those events occurring, those extraordinary events occurring in one gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, it's
right.
we use
And
Occam's razor on that. We could say, well, what's the simplest explanation here? Either this actually happened, this wild, craziest event in human history actually happened, or the simpler explanation is he just made it up.
right.
Now, as a skeptic using these principles, what do you think I'm going to choose? Like, oh, yeah, this definitely happened simply because it's written in one passage in Matthew and not the other three gospels. And we have no historical record anywhere else of this, no outside independent sources verifying this happened. Nobody wrote about this. No historians noticed this. No, we don't. Yeah, I'm going to pick that, or am I just going to say, well, you know what? The simplest explanation is that he just made it up for effect
Right.
because Matthew wanted to have unique material that the other three gospels didn't have, because you got to have something special if you're writing an account of the same story.
And
Like,
speaking of
it's
that,
pretty
that
obvious.
and speaking of that, now it just hit me. I actually think it's Matthew 27.
Okay.
And I think it's 47:46. Something for some reason that's what's coming
Well,
back to me. But it's been a long
it,
time since I've looked at that.
if you go to Google and you type in zombies in the Gospels,
Does it pop
you're
up?
gonna get straight to the only gospel that has someone like people rising out of their graves and marching into Jerusalem and appearing to people. I know it's a pejorative, like, oh, zombies in the Bible, but I mean it sort of kind of is if you
I
want
mean, but
to go.
when you already are stuck in that matrix, man, it's just like you'll come up with all kinds of theories as to what that is, to
Yeah,
make
and
stuff
now
up.
and the average Christian will accept this story as gospel,
Yep.
ironically, with absolutely no possible way to verify this. Right? Show me a method by which you can test this claim. There is none. This is simply a story written down around 2,000 years ago about a crazy event. Now, why would I believe that? Well, because yeah, you're stuck in that matrix where, well, God exists and did everything, so of course God could do this too. Okay, I mean, if you want to be irrational, like just because God exists and might interfere in reality, does not mean that this specific event took place also. Like
Right.
you're building layer upon layer upon layer to this God concept, and you proved none of them except for your base assumption that God exists. Therefore, they could all be possible. Like you're not using any methods at all to get to these conclusions.
Right. And every one of the stories would need its own verification. It rising from the dead is significantly a greater claim than walking on water, even, or
Right.
even walking through a wall, for that matter. As crazy as those are. So, if you asked me, which one would I be more inclined to believe if I had to choose one with a gun to my head, I'd be like, yeah, walking on water. I'll take that because the odds of that happening are far greater than rising from the dead. I've just, that's not, you can't even do that as a magic trick. I mean, if I've actually been there to test you and you see that you're actually dead, you're not coming back from that. There's no
Yeah.
way.
So I wanted to touch on at least just one point where what would make the story of the Gospels more believable to me. And I think we can add a lot of different things that we would count as evidence that could potentially verify or at least make these stories more believable. But one of them that I've thought of for many years now is, what if Jesus had risen from the dead? Now, the story is that the Jews conspired to kill him. It was a really big event. They dragged him before Pilate. They had a big trial. Pilate had him taken to Golgotha. He was crucified. I mean, this was a big deal. Okay, so Jesus had fought with the Pharisees for his entire earthly ministry. He was constantly doing battle in the synagogues with these guys, telling parables, like making accusations, and flipping over temple tables. I mean, it was a big deal.
Mhm.
So Jesus dies, He's executed by them. They essentially win. They beat him. They kill him, and then he rises from the dead. And what does he do after that? He appears in secret to his followers, and then to the alleged 500 witnesses, which were Christians at that point, and then he ascends to heaven. Now, what would have made this story 100 times more believable is if Jesus rose from the dead, and then he went right back to the Pharisees and the Romans, and he appeared in front of them instead of appearing in private to his followers. And he had to make these guys realize, like, right in their face, I have risen from the dead. I have beaten death. I am the Messiah. And then he rises to heaven. That would have sparked a little bit more of a notice in the historical record. Then we would have seen people write about this. Then we would have definitely seen a Roman, third-hand Roman account or independent verification. Pilate would have written back to Rome like, holy crap, this dude, like, I crucified this guy. He came back to life, and he came right back to confront me.
Right.
And it would have completely destroyed the religion of Judaism at the time, which Christ had, according to Christian doctrine, Christ had come to fulfill and replace. He could have destroyed it instantly by appearing to the Pharisees in the temple as the risen Savior. They would have been without excuse for sure. And Judaism would have immediately collapsed, and Christianity would have taken its place. And it would have made a tremendous impact on the world at that time. But instead, the gospel story is that he rose from the dead, really big deal, and then he snuck out of the tomb and appeared to only the people that knew him personally, and then he took off to heaven. Like,
And then
I
Rome,
know what I would have liked to have seen, what didn't happen.
and then Rome would have been the one to start the Crusades. Because they would have absolutely believed, and they just would have forced everybody to Christianize.
Yeah. Christians like to claim that, Christianity was extraordinary in its spread in the early church and in Judea and across the Mediterranean. Wow, it just caught on like wildfire, and this had to be miraculous. Well, maybe if Jesus had stuck around for a little bit longer and showed himself to the people who had crucified him, maybe then we could talk about how extraordinary Christianity's beginnings were.
Well, I mean, sure, when you look at the stories in the Bible and you look at the people who were willing to supposedly die for Jesus, okay, well, according to the narrative, they got to see him after he rose from the dead in private. I mean, okay, if I actually saw a guy rise from the dead, I might be inclined to follow his teachings too, and be willing to die for whatever he says is true if my eternal life depends on it. But
Right.
Why is it that they all got to see, and since then we all just have to take it on faith? That seems a little unfair.
Well, for sure, but let's also apply the principles of skepticism to those accounts of the apostles being martyred. That's a common Christian claim that really needs to be addressed. How do you know that the apostles were martyred for their faith after seeing the risen Jesus? How do you know any of that? Like, do we have
Fox's Book of Martyrs, man?
Well, yeah, but okay. Where do we have those accounts that are found in Fox's Book of Martyrs?
We don't.
We don't have any written record of this happening. This is church tradition. Because if you really drill down into this and this is so easy. Just go to Google and type in, how do we know the apostles were martyred? You are going to get the actual, source material of how we know. And how we know is we don't know. It simply is not in the historical record. These are stories that have, in fact, less reliability than the gospel accounts, because we don't have accounts of them being martyred.
Right. Yep.
So you can make that claim and say, oh, well, they wouldn't have died for a lie, so then the religion must be true. But how do you know? It's just not there. You don't have that information. You have the Catholic Church, in the preceding centuries saying that they did, but when you track back the chain of custody of the stories, you end up at a brick wall. There's just nothing there.
Right. So when it comes to being a skeptic, I sense that everybody is a skeptic in like one or two areas of their life. Some of us try to be skeptical in every area of our life to make sure we're drawing the best conclusions possible so that we're building our lives upon something that actually has, um, you know, explanations that are rooted in testability, for lack of a better way of saying it. The methodology that we have that we can, use the natural world, things that I know exist. Now, hard solipsism aside, we could just be brains in a vat. Who the hell knows? But assuming that this is reality, and it's the only reality I do know, so what choice do I have? I'm going to live by this. So I'm going to do my best to be skeptical in everything. Now, there's some things that, as you were saying, the ratio is different. Some things I don't need to apply my skepticism intentionally because it's just naturally in my mind. When I go to the bank and I give them $5 bills and want a five in exchange, or the other way around, whatever, I don't have to question whether or not my 20 equals their one or something like that. You just know this stuff intuitively. You just kind of go with it. But when it comes to harder things, which ironically, I don't know why the supernatural is a harder thing, because it's an extraordinary claim, but it's just because it's been believed so long and by so many people that it makes it something that's extraordinary. Like it's a wonderful claim that we should really think hard about before we question it. And I sit back and I'm like, why? Why does this take so much thought to wonder? Like, if you've never seen it, you've nothing to test it. All you're having is people telling you, oh, I had an experience. Okay. Tell me how to have that same experience. Well, I can't. Okay. So I have if you don't have any way to actually validate anything you believe, why do you believe it? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and that brings us to another one of the principles of skepticism is to avoid special pleading and double standards. So the special pleading fallacy, which is essentially a cool way of saying double standards, is when someone says, well, I use these methods to know what I know in the real world all the time, but when I get to this one thing is special. Like, yeah. This is true because it's true, Like, I reserve this special place for this one thing that I can't prove, and I just take it on faith.
Right.
And that is a fallacy, because you should apply the same standards of evidence, the same rules, the same standards or principles of skepticism to everything. Once you do that, you're going to find that your religious-based worldview will fall apart just as easily as anybody else's, because you're no longer carving out a special place for that one thing simply because it's part of who you are, part of your identity, and you don't want to put it at risk. So if you do that, if you carve out a special place for that, like you're committing a logical fallacy. And when you are committing a logical fallacy, then that means that you have no way to actually, your logic is broken in a way that you now cannot prove a thing to be true. Like, that's essentially what a logical fallacy is I have an argument that is flawed. I've identified this flaw, this special pleading fallacy, and because of that, like, I can't prove it's true because it's broken. But if you go ahead and do it anyway, you're being irrational. There's just no other way about it.
Which, again, it's strange that Christianity requires irrationality. Like, supposedly God is logic. He's the logos, and yet he demands irrational. He demands us to be irrational in order to believe he exists. That is the craziest thing. Of course, the Christian will say, no, it's completely irrational, but it really isn't. And I guess this is the point I was trying to make with the show example that I said with the kid and whatever, because where do you draw the line as to when you switch off the supernatural is the reason for everything, to switching it to, well, no, now it's just the Father's responsible for this? Like, how do you get to say, well, I'm only going to say it's the supernatural when it's these things, but when it comes to a kid in the hospital, he's got bruises, that's not a supernatural, that's just his father beating him? Why don't you go one way or the other? Either be completely rational and use the empirical data that we have and say, okay, therefore I have no reason to believe a God exists, so why am I? Or use the faith method entirely and just basically say, well, God or the supernatural is behind everything, and just see it everywhere. and walk around like that. No matter what anybody says, the answer is it's supernatural. Like, be consistent one way or the other, but that's not consistent. Nobody would do that, which goes to show you're being irrational in this one area.
Yeah, the answer to the question of when do you shut it off is going to be the same every time for religious people, and it's when they feel it's right. They don't have a process to determine when it's supernatural and when it's not. It's whenever they feel that it's supernatural or whenever they feel that it's not. And fortunately, they're able to conduct themselves in a shared reality in the proper way 90% of the time, because they intuitively know that, hey, maybe I shouldn't be crazy right now. I mean, you don't take God to the grocery store with your shopping list. You leave him at home because he can't help you buy groceries. So, I mean, they intuitively know that God doesn't play a huge role in everyday life. But then, whenever they feel like it, then they'll interject God into it. And we see that. Let's take your example of the child being abused. A correlation to that would be when the Catholic Church does exorcisms. Like, how do they know that this person has a demon versus this person has schizophrenia or has a mental condition and they're having a psychotic break or they're suffering from some kind of illness? Like, they don't know. It's just whenever they feel like this might apply some sort of vague criteria to, oh yeah, it's time to call a priest. We've exhausted all natural options, so let's get the priest in here with the holy water, and we'll treat this individual as if it's a supernatural problem. Like, they don't have real scientific criteria when they draw that line. It's whenever they feel like it.
Yep. And that is what, in my mind, presuppositionalists tend to do with the impossibility of the contrary argument, by eliminating all other arguments. The one that's left must be true, even though there could be others we just hadn't thought of, but that's their argument. Therefore, God, it's a very irrational argument. But speaking of which, we're going to actually engage with a presuppositionalist this Sunday. You want to tell us about him?
Yeah, we're going to have a YouTuber on named Reformed Riley. Apparently, he specializes in the presuppositional argument. And so we're going to have him on Sunday. And we're just going to have a conversation about it. Got some questions for him. It's not going to be a debate. It's not going to be, we're not going to beat up on him or double team him or anything like that. I just want to know, like, why he likes this argument, and I'd like him to present it to us so we can discuss it.
It's more like an interview. We just want to see where he's coming from. Very interesting. Yeah. It should be fun. I'm sure he'll have questions for us too. I have no doubt it will end up being more of a debate, but we're going to try our best to just have some fun with it and have a friendly discussion. But that's the goal. So that's this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So that's going to be a great time, and it's going to be live right here on the Deconversionists. So go to our channel, make sure you like, subscribe, get notified.
Yeah, so we're going to be under more pressure, because if we screw this up really badly, we won't be able to delete it.
Yeah, there's no coming back ever. We're just done. We're going to go back to birds of a feather.
We'll both go back to being a couple of failed authors. And we'll hang it up. So there you go, Riley. You can if you win the argument, we're done, I guess.
Yeah, I wish that were the case. We're too stubborn for that, though. We're gonna have plenty of mishaps, but also plenty of great stuff. So that's just the way life is. But we're gonna have a good time with that. Then on the 23rd, also a Sunday at 2 p.m., we're going to be able to interview Josh Patterson, who is a hybrid Christian, or I don't know if he'd call himself a hybrid Christian. For some reason, the term he uses is evading me. I apologize, Josh.
He's let's say non-typical Christian.
Yeah, non-typical. Some days he's even calls himself an atheist. So it's really bizarre, but he remains a Christian. So it'll be a fun interview for sure. Just getting to understand that position a little bit better. And I have other friends that hold to his position as well. So it'll be interesting. But I know he's a good spokesman for the position. And I apologize. It's just I don't know why it's not coming to me. But either way, you guys can check out Josh Patterson. His podcast is with parentheses and then Thinking Christianity. So that's what it is. I'll have the link as well in the I'll hold off on his link. I want to have Riley's in there again. before we do that. So I'll put Josh's in a couple weeks. But check out Reform Riley before Sunday if you guys want to get his perspective on things, and then we're going to have a great discussion. This weekend's going to be fun. I am interviewing on Tristan Gabriel's channel, the 21st Century Mind. That's going to be a good time. We're going to be talking about my upcoming release of my book, Unravelation, How Those of Faith Find Freedom. It's going to be really exciting to release that. So we're going to be talking this Saturday about it. And then Sunday, of course, is our show. And then Tuesday nights, for the next 3 Tuesdays at 6 p.m., I'm going to be having an informal debate with Nigel Taylor, who has recently returned to Christianity from atheism. So we'll see what happened there and how that went, and we'll discuss things together and see who has a more reasonable position. So that's what's going on in the next few weeks as far as we're concerned, as far as I'm concerned, and I hope you guys will join us for those things. Make sure you get over to Deconversion Nation on Facebook. We love to have you there. Throw out your thoughts. Let's have some discussions, especially if you're a Christian who is questioning and would like to understand a little bit more about where people like us are coming from. Come on over there. That's a great place for you to be private. Nobody needs to know that you're there. It's a great chance for you to just ask some questions and get some answers from atheists, and maybe even some people who aren't atheists, but predominantly atheists, I'm sure, is what you'll get your responses from, especially, hopefully, after this episode. But I think those are the big things. Anything else I'm missing, Elliot, or anything else you'd like to say? And with that, just take us out.
Well, I think, as usual, we have sufficiently covered the topic for a full hour. So, yeah, we are good.
All right, everybody.
See everybody on Sunday.
Absolutely. We are the Deconversionists, deconverting those who fell for the con. Have a good night.